Hey, everybody. Glad to have you join us here tonight for this preview. Session starts tomorrow morning, bright and early, and it's gearing up to be a very interesting one, both based on what we saw last year that will be coming into this session, but also the issues we know that are going to show up, at least for debate, if not as actual bills that will be introduced this year. So just a quick overview of what we'll talk about here tonight. First of all, just some details about this session. Then we'll talk about the bills that carried over from last year to this year, some of the new issues we're planning to encounter this year, stop briefly for some questions. This is the 109th legislature, and this is our second session, right? Nebraska's legislative sessions are spread out over a 2-year period, with last year being the first session of the 109th legislature. This is just a 60-day session, as opposed to last year's 90-day session. This one is scheduled to run from January 7th up until April 17th. So all told, the 60-day session is a much quicker, much more condensed version of a legislative session, which can be good and bad depending upon what we have to debate, what we have to discuss during that session. As with every second session, the committees and the leadership that were elected during the previous session carry over. During every first session, there is a time of debate and discussion about who will chair the committees, who the leadership of the body is going to be. All those roles will carry over into this year, as will committee assignments carry over from the long to the short. Big issues we know we're starting off this session with, and I'm sure many of, if not all of you, have seen the tremendous budget deficit that we're dealing with. Now, that is not one of Common Cause's issues, but it is going to inform the entire session in terms of just what will we have time for? Will we have time to get into some of the issues that members of the body want to dig in on, but that may not be the presiding issue, like the budget? Or will the budget eat up all of the time in debating what gets cut, what potential new revenue paths there are? If that's an interest to you, would definitely point you towards Open Sky. They will be giving a lot of great information about the budget and how that's all going to work out this year. So if you want to spend more time with the budget, talk to our friends at Open Sky, tune into what they're doing. Another big issue that we're going to encounter early in the session, it's yet to be seen how this will play out throughout the entire session, is Senator McEwen's potential expulsion. At the close of last year's legislative session, Senator McEwen got himself into some trouble through his words and his actions. And in the time between that, the end of last session, and now, that's continued to percolate. At this point, the executive committee of the legislature has recommended that he be expelled. They voted unanimously to expel him, but that still has to go before the full body for debate and a full vote. I expect this will come up early in the session, given that it's something that needs to be dealt with and needs to be talked about quickly. But I don't know how the rest of the body is going to view it. Senator McEwen has shown that he is going to fight this expulsion, that he is not going to accept the charges against him or his responsibility, but is going to continue to fight for his seat and his place in the legislature. And so that complicates matters. He could have stepped down in the interim. Governor Pillen had asked him to do so, and he declined to do it. So there will need to be a full debate and discussion of the full body. And that will take up time, that will take up energy, and is sure to ignite some tensions that are just very, very unpredictable at this moment. As an organization that focuses on accountability, transparency, and ethics, this is a particular interest to us. We have always been interested in looking at ways for the legislature to better handle ethics complaints, to better handle the behavior of senators when it's outside of what's permissible. But that is a difficult discussion in the legislature. Legislators are not keen to talk about bodies that should govern their conduct. They would prefer to govern one another, but that invites certain conflicts of interest that could be rectified with an independent body to oversee their behavior. This debate's come up time and again as legislators get themselves in hot water. And this will be another instance where hopefully we can have useful, productive debate on Senator conduct. But like I said, I have no idea, no predictions on how that one will go, other than to know that McEwen himself is planning to fight it. Now on to our carryover bills. So these are the bills that, right, in it, if our legislature is 2 years. The bills that are introduced in that first session that are not dealt with fully, they're not passed, or they're not killed in one way or another. If they remain alive at the end of that first session, they carry over into the next year. And these are some of those bills that we're watching and paying attention to. First of all, we've got some of the resolutions, some of the things that would need to go to a vote of the people. We've got LR 25CA, which would be a commission focused on legislator pay. This would be a commission that would not be made up of legislators, but of an independent body that would review the pay of legislators and determine what would be fair. Many of you, I'm sure, are aware that Nebraska legislators do not make a lot. They are amongst the lowest paid, by far not the lowest paid in the nation, but they are also not making a great deal, likely not as much as their work would entail. So this discussion of how legislators should be paid, what's fair, is a perennial issue we see come up in the legislature, and usually it comes in the form of a straight increase to their pay. This, in turn, would not be just a flat increase to their pay, but would create a commission that could study the issue, determine what would be fair, and then propose ideas that senators could then introduce to increase pay. We know this is a complicated issue for many Nebraskans. As an organization, Common Cause has long thought that our legislators are underpaid. That is in part because we know that pay difference is made up for, at least in legislators' minds, with the gifts and the generosity of lobbyists. We think that low pay allows lobbyists the ability to step in and give of their own to influence legislators. We think that increasing pay could help limit the impact of that lobbyist input. But at the same time, like I said, interesting, complicated question that as we are in a budget deficit year, I should say, even more complicated to talk about paying state legislators more when we can't function as a government. So not that bill is out, that resolution remains out there, remains ready for a floor debate if the executive committee would vote it out for the floor debate, which could happen. Next up, and I know this one is on many, many people's radar, is LR 24CA. This is the resolution to make Nebraska a winner-take-all state. Right? This is that debate about how Nebraska distributes our electoral college votes. Right? As a state, we distribute them by congressional district. If Omaha votes different than the rest of the state, they get the opportunity to distribute their electoral college vote to the candidate of their choice. We are one of only 2 states that use this model. And I know all of you are well aware of this discussion, this debate, and this ongoing fight. Last year, the bill to make us a winner-take-all state was defeated. It was defeated because a few conservative legislators saw the value in keeping us in the unique state we're in, keeping us different from others because it draws in candidates and it draws in interest in a way that simply being a winner-take-all state would not. And because of those senators, that bill failed. This resolution remains out there. It had a hearing last year. It was a very interesting hearing where the governor's office came in and said they do not support this resolution, but it yet to see how their perspective on that may have changed in the interim. There's definitely going to be renewed interest in moving this forward. But I would note that there is also a ballot initiative out there right now looking to put winner take all on the ballot this upcoming year. I have not yet heard that they've been successful in their efforts, and I haven't seen them out there myself. But I only want to flag that to say that there are multiple ways interests are coming at this winner take all fight in an attempt to put it on the ballot. If this resolution would pass, it would need to go before the voters of Nebraska. And that is in one way a concern because many worry that would be a way for legislators to absolve themselves of any guilt in this situation and to say, we'll send it to the people. We don't really need to wrestle with it. Let's let the people vote on it and thereby absolve themselves of any responsibility, maybe move some of those moderates over to the side of the winner-take-all crowd. But the people in the middle, those legislators who fought last year, have shown skepticism towards this idea, skepticism towards winner-take-all in general. And so I'm hopeful that they will continue to hold the line and that they will continue to be allies this session. Last up here on some of our carryovers, we had three bills, LR 14, LR 21, and LB 259, related to a federal constitutional convention. Now, this is an idea I've talked about a fair amount in my time here. It's the idea of calling a constitutional convention to rewrite aspects of the federal constitution. This is a prospect that Common Cause has opposed for over a decade. We do not think it is a good idea nor the right time to be rewriting the federal constitution, but there are many, frankly, conservative legislators in the Nebraska legislature that find this idea very appealing. Right now, the main proponent of this movement is Senator Lauren Lippincott. He introduced, I believe, all three of these bills, and they're aimed at similar ideas. LR 21 and LR 14 would both be wide-ranging constitutional convention bills, basically calling for a convention of the states to come together and rewrite the Constitution. LB 259 would put some limits, some structure around that process when it comes to how Nebraska selects and conducts the behavior of our delegates to such a convention. It's an attempt to make it seem like something we control or could control. Unfortunately, it is not a process that can be controlled by state law. Given that a constitutional convention is written into the federal constitution, state laws will not be controlling. And so even LB 259, which seems like a good idea on its face, is dangerous in its own way because it makes it seem like we could control something that we can't. So we opposed all three of those measures last year. They did not reach a conclusion. They are still sitting in the government committee and could potentially be voted out for a floor debate this year. We have not heard yet that there's any interest in doing that. But at the same time, there's always the prospect that a legislator was working very hard in the interim to get support for something that had no support last year. And so we remain very watchful over those issues and prepared to act if we would see movement on them in this next session. Here's our last group of carryover bills from last year. First up, we have LB 218. What this would be is automatic voter registration, which seems broad, but what it really is moving from a presumption that when you go into the DMV, you check a box to say you want to register to vote. This would change that to the presumption that you would check a box not to register to vote. Instead, it would assume everybody who comes into the DMV would like to register to vote and go through the process of that registration. It would allow anyone to opt out. But what we've seen from this very small, simple change in other states is it increases the number of voter registrations. And as long as that is followed up with action from the state, with action from nonprofits, with action from political parties, those people do then turn out to vote and engage in the process. And so it's just a good way, a simple way to improve the voter registration process, make it a little more streamlined, and bring more people into our elections that might otherwise not take part. It remains out there. This was a bill brought by Senator John Frederickson out of Omaha. This has an idea that's been introduced before, has not yet made it out of committee for a floor debate in the past, but we will continue to support it. We supported it last year, continue to support it this year. We're hopeful that there's movement on it in the years ahead, but more than anything, we're just hopeful and glad that it's continuing to be debated in the body, that these bills get introduced year over year. It's important that the government committee see pro-voter ideas, because without bills like these, there would be more bad ideas than good, and we're just happy to see the good ideas put out there. Next up, we got LB 237, expanded all-mail elections. So right now in Nebraska, there are, I want to say 14, I could be wrong, but there are a good handful plus counties that conduct all their elections by mail. This is a process that they go through with the Secretary of State to get approval, and they're allowed to conduct their entire election process via the mail. That means that every registered voter in those counties gets their ballot in the mail. they fill it out, they send it back in. And in those counties, we see the highest voter turnout of any other county in the state. It is by tremendous margins the difference in these counties that use all mail versus counties that do not. And we're hopeful that this is going to continue to expand at the county level. But the problem we run into is that some counties are excluded from being able to actually utilize this process. Because of the way the law was originally written, Douglas, Sarpy, Lancaster, and quickly Hall County are no longer allowed to use all mail elections whatsoever. The statute's just written in a way that excludes them. Now, I should note, just because a county can use this process doesn't mean the Secretary of State will approve them to use this process. It's an entire approval process through the Secretary of State's office. But right now, Omaha, Lincoln, Grand Island cannot even apply. They can't even bring it up. They can't discuss it. And so this bill would simply just open it up so any county could use this process. It wouldn't be restricted to just those under a certain population, but any county in Nebraska would be able to apply to use it. We think that's simple, common sense change to the law. I don't know if it was changed, Lancaster County would move to all mail elections tomorrow, but I don't think they should be excluded from being able to consider it if it makes the most sense for their voters. And so we've long been in support of this change. It's something if I remember correctly, has been debated for at least 8 years, if not more, continually brought up by legislators, but the government committee, it's another idea that they are not interested in moving forward at this point, but we are happy to see it continually brought up and fought for. Next up, LB 541. This was a packet of really bad election ideas. It would extremely restrict absentee voting for every Nebraskan. Every Nebraskan now can apply to vote by the mail, right? You can apply to have an absentee ballot sent to your home. This bill would make it so that only a handful of people would be eligible to do that. You would have to show extreme circumstances. You would have to show illness. You would have to show that you're over a certain age, basically taking it away from the vast majority of Nebraskans who use our absentee voting system, and only giving it to those who have some extreme circumstance. Beyond that, it had a number of other just really bad elections ideas, like hand counting, requiring counties to hand count large amounts of their ballots, and changing online voter registration, actually fully removing online voter registration, so that the only way you could potentially vote or register would be to go in or to mail something in, but no more online registration whatsoever. Now, this hearing, thankfully, was very well attended by people in opposition. That included Common Cause, that included many other advocates like Civic Nebraska and the ACLU and all of our friends, as well as the county election commissioners who came out in strong opposition. So thankfully, the bill did not move and received a very, very strong no from the public. But that does not mean the bill died. There was no vote taken on the bill. And so it remains in the government committee and could potentially move this year. One concerning note we have heard is that there is interest in working with the sponsor of this bill to address some of his worries about our elections and bring forward some smaller, scaled down version of this. That is very troubling. Right? Any version of this bill is a bad idea. Any version of this bill deserves widespread public opposition. And so it's another bill that we're keeping very close watch on, with the fear that some more agreeable version could be introduced, an amended version that scales back the worst ideas, but still keeps a lot of bad ideas. And so you can be sure that if anything like that appears, it will be something we're screaming very loudly. There is another ballot initiative that's looking to require hand counts of ballots across Nebraska. And so there is this idea out there that the way we conduct our elections needs to be changed. Ideas like hand counting of ballots or restricting how we vote is the way to move us forward. We are in absolute opposition to that. And so we will do everything we can if such an idea pops up to fight back against it. The last one on our page here is LB 586. This was a brand new idea that I have not seen introduced before, but I think is novel and worthy of everyone's attention. This is a bill aimed at helping voters who either are in hospitals, are in other confined circumstances like pretrial holding, or other areas where they might be confined, can't go to a polling place on election day, but are completely eligible to vote. This bill would require standards for county elections officials to ensure those voters are actually getting the chance to vote. In two of our larger counties, right, our largest, in Lancaster and Sarpy counties, not Sarpy, Douglas, my mistake. This is already being done for the most part. Those county elections offices are going to hospitals. They are making sure everyone who's eligible but can't get to a polling place on election day gets the chance to vote. Unfortunately, in some of our smaller counties, this is not being as stringently enforced or pursued. And so this was an attempt to standardize the way we go about pursuing those voters and ensuring every vote and every eligible voter gets the chance to vote. It's like I said, a new idea, but I think it's a really good one. It's one that could ensure the outlying areas of the state have the same access to the vote, same access to the ballot that the bigger areas of our state do. It got stuck in committee, but I'm hopeful that the sponsor will continue to work on it and that just through diligently coming back to it time and again, we could see some movement on this. It's just a new idea that I think needs to continually be fought for. Those are the carryover bills that we're keeping an eye on. So here are some of the new issues we know or expect are coming down the pipeline. First of all, I've received word that a senator is looking at introducing a bill to cap the amount that any individual can contribute to a campaign. This is an idea that's used in many other states. Many states have a limit on how much any one donor can give to a campaign. Some states set it very high at up to $10,000. Some set it low at $1,500. Nebraska has no limit. We are one of only a dozen states that has absolutely no limit on how much an individual can give, which means that wealthy individuals play a very large role in our elections. When there is no limit on how much a Ricketts or a Pede can give to a candidate, that gives them tremendous power to dictate which candidates are successful, which candidates get their name out there. And so this is a bill and an idea that we have long supported. We think Nebraska would be well served by a reasonable limit on how much an individual can give to a campaign. This bill would set the limit at $3,000, and we think that's reasonable. It would ensure that the average person is not barred from giving to a candidate. It wouldn't set it so low as to stop someone from giving to someone they believe in, but it would also prevent the $10,000, $20,000, $50,000 contributions we see from the wealthiest individuals. This is not a new idea. It's one I've testified on many times, and we've seen introduced time and again over the decades. And to Wes's question in the chat, individuals in Nebraska law are any donor. Any donor would be limited to a $3,000. It would be corporations, it would be PACs, it would be genuine individuals, people, it would be, I believe it would also be parties. It would be across the board. It would be a $3,000 contribution cap just across the board. So that's one we know is going to be introduced. It is an uphill battle. The legislature does not like to talk about campaign finance, but at the same time, we think it's an important issue that deserves continual rehearing and we will show up to fight for it. The next one here is voter data privacy. I've also received word that the county election officials are seeing a need to create greater structure and privacy around Nebraskans' voter data, particularly because of the voter ID law that was introduced several years ago now, because of how that law required individuals to provide their driver's license or other identifying data that was attached to their voter file. Because it created a system where now our voter files include so much more data than they did before, they want to ensure that that data is not publicly disclosable, that it's not something that is given out to anyone who requests it. Right now, state law does not put a clear line on what can be given out from that new data captured by voter ID. So this bill would limit exactly what can be given out. It would say that driver's license data and other data is not accessible by anyone requesting it. I have not seen the final version of this language, and it's something that I am keeping a close eye on simply because of the unintended consequences of such a bill. While the intention is definitely good, I think voters' privacy, the knowledge that their data is not being shared everywhere is a good thing. I do think that there could be unintended consequences of such a bill when it comes to how certain organizations follow up with voters who may not have turned in a ballot. Good question, Linda. Would this voter data privacy law pertain to requests from the federal government? That is another big aspect of this that I am curious about. How far reaching would the impact be? Would it stop the DOJ from being able to request Nebraskans' voter data? Or would it only apply to people like you and I and give a federal administration carte blanche to request whatever they want? For those who do not know, right now, the Federal Department of Justice has requested all of Nebraskans' voter data. And that is a situation where we have sued Secretary Evans to restrain him and stop him from releasing that data to the federal government. We believe state law is very clear on this front, that he does not have the authority to give over things like social security numbers or driver's license numbers to the federal government. But this bill, this voter data privacy bill, clearly interacts with that suit and with concerns about Nebraskans' voter data privacy. And so we are waiting very patiently for what is the final version to make up our mind on whether to oppose or support this. It could go either way. I don't know if this is good or bad yet until I see how the actual language is written. Next up on the list here is mid-decade redistricting. Now, this is all the noise, right? We've been hearing out of Texas, out of California, out of Indiana, out of Missouri, right? These legislative efforts to redraw voting districts, not when it's supposed to be done, which is every decade, but to do it in the middle of a decade to give partisan advantage to one party in an upcoming election. Now, last year, there was some noise about this happening in Nebraska. There were legislators saying that there's discussions happening, people are talking about it. There was a little bit of federal pressure on us to do something, but it all, in the end, kind of amounted to nothing. Now, I'm sure those conversations continued in the background, but nothing was ever brought. There was never any serious discussion of a special session to do so. In the interim, we have continued to hear that this is something certain legislators are looking at bringing this session, that there is an interest from some in redoing Nebraska's voting districts, starting the process over again to draw the maps so that there's greater partisan advantage for one party over another. Now, I can only speculate on what those maps would look like. No idea, but I can say that that process, if this bill were introduced, that process would be an immensely difficult one. It would be a very difficult one to pull off in the time frame they'd have to do it in, given that our primaries happen not long after the session and that the general comes quickly after that. These maps would be on such a short, tight timeline. Given everything else going on in the session, it would truly be a mess. Now, we would oppose this effort no matter what. In Nebraska, this makes no sense. There is no need for a mid-decade redistricting. There's no case to be made that our maps right now are horribly partisan, biased, racially discriminatory. There's just no good case to be made other than creating partisan advantage for one party over another. So this is something we're keeping very, very close eye on. If this comes up, it would become our primary fight during the session, stopping this right there neck and neck with winner take all. But a mid-decade redistricting effort that could pick up steam here would just be bad for every voter, for every Nebraskan. And so it's something we are skeptical of them being able to effectively do, but at the same time concerned that someone's going to attempt it and try to make it happen, even if the idea is bad on its face. Last thing I want to note about new things coming in this year, and that is changes to the ballot initiative process itself. Last year, there was a little discussion during the session about changes to the initiative process that could impact how people are able to place issues on the ballot. Now, it wasn't directly targeted at undermining the initiative process in the way that many were expecting. It was more on the margins of the issue. But in the interim, between last session and now, there was an interim study held within the legislature where they brought in a legislator from out of state. He phoned in, but he came in to talk about how in his state he'd managed to pass many bills that stopped people from using the initiative process, how he had made it much, much, much more difficult for people to actually place things on the ballot, and how proud he was of those efforts. Based on that testimony and the interest of legislators, frankly, to undermine the will of the people when it comes to ballot initiatives, we are very concerned that a bill will be introduced this year aimed really squarely at undermining the initiative process, not aiming at the margins, but completely changing the way we go about qualifying things for the ballot, about just making it harder for any and everyone to place things on the ballot. That would not be at all out of line with what we saw last session when it came to their undermining of multiple initiatives, right? When it came to minimum wage, when it came to medical marijuana, paid sick leave, all of these things, the legislature worked to undermine directly through their work. But for many legislators, the real goal would be to undermine the entire process and ensure that it's just hard as heck to use, so they can remain the ones in full control of the legislative process. So that is something we are, again, another issue we're keeping very close watch on to see what shows up and determine how bad it would be, determine the impact, and determine what kind of action, what kind of influence needs to be brought to bear to ensure these things don't move forward. So those are the new issues we know are either being discussed, being debated, or that we know for sure will be introduced this year.
Thanks, Gavin. We got a number of good questions. So we're going to start with Senator McCowan. From Common Cause's perspective, did Senator McCowan's behavior require action?
I think that's a valid question. As even the legislature is waiting, we haven't seen the evidence. The legislators themselves are waiting to see what the actual evidence the executive committee acted on. We've heard, right, the news reporting has shown that this is a pattern of behavior for him. Based on all of that, I simply can't say. I can't say. All I can say for sure is that there should be a standard of conduct for our legislators, and there should be a clear process by which these issues are dealt with. That is not fully the case right now. And so there's improvements to be made in the process, but I do wait to see what more there is to be said about or heard about Senator McCowan and his actions.
For those conservative senators that voted down winner take all last session, are they still on that side, still probably going to vote in opposition to taking us back to winner take all?
Yes. At this point, the same senators have, again, in the interim, noted that they stand in opposition to it. As I noted in my overview of the resolution, I do worry that there is potential for movement, but at the same time, these senators have shown a willingness to buck the trend. And so I think we can rely on them to, at the very least, be skeptical of any efforts to change this. But there's a little more risk this year, I think, than last in terms of them flipping.
What is the opposition to automatic registration? What's the argument against it?
That is a legitimate question. And the answer is there's rarely voiced opposition to many of these issues. I would love nothing more than for many of these bills to get voted to the floor so that we could hear genuine debate on them. But the fact of the matter is, the most we hear about from senators about these issues is in the hearings themselves, and they often don't share anything. So the opposition to the idea itself you hear broadly is that it leads to people being registered to vote that are not eligible to vote, and that in the past, senators have argued that voting's already easy enough. And do we really need to make it any easier? If you want to be registered to vote, it's possible. What's stopping you? Why do we need to make it easier for people? To that first issue of that it includes people in the system that are not eligible, that's simply not a problem in Nebraska. We have checks and balances to ensure that voters that are eligible do get registered and that voters that are ineligible do not get registered. And so that's not an issue. And when it comes to making voting's too easy, we just disagree with that one. I think there's plenty of barriers to voting, and moving them out of the way is never a bad idea.
What are the arguments presented by senators for why mail-in balloting should be limited?
It plays into that the national narrative that mail-in ballots are a way that people cheat, that there is tremendous fraud in the mail-in system, and that it should only really be used by people who need it because there is so much fraud that we need to restrict it. And that's really what it boils down to, is that there's fraud in the system and mail-in voting is that fraud. There's no data that says that whatsoever in Nebraska. And I think our own Secretary of State would disagree with that, but that's what they bring to the table. It comes from that 2020 election fraud, election theft movement, and just the general fear that all mail-in voting is a fraudulent activity. And so they want to keep just enough for people who might be homebound, but everyone else should be cut off to prevent that fraud.
Mike made a comment: proponents of bad election bills can never seem to articulate how their bill would make elections better. Agreed.
Completely agreed. But I don't know if that's their goal either, Mike.
Yeah. Who most often requests voter data in our current state before, the federal government decided they were going to start requesting it?
Usually that is political parties, campaigns. That's who's, for the most part, requesting voter data. There are some other, as I noticed, there are some other requests when it comes to this ballot chase process to ensure any errors in the vote are rectified. But for the most part, it's campaigns, it's candidates, it's that type of activity.
For the Nebraska redistricting process, who does that? The unicameral, an outside body, has an independent redistricting group been discussed by the unicameral?
Great question. I'm always happy to talk about redistricting. In Nebraska, it is solely the responsibility of the Nebraska Legislature. They are the ones who draft the maps, who bring the public into the process through some public hearings, and then ultimately vote on those maps and send them to the Secretary of State. So it's the unicameral, it's that body. An independent commission has been discussed multiple times in the past. In 2020, we were part of an effort that was discussing bringing it to the ballot, but then 2020 was 2020. And because of all of that, we were not able to put anything in the field to gather signatures to do that. But yes, it's something that as Common Cause, we have supported and discussed with legislators and advocates for over a decade now. It is unfortunately not something that the legislature is interested in doing at the moment. I will note there was a previous effort, and I'm not sure what the year was, but there was a bill that passed the legislature during Pete Ricketts' term in office that would have given some authority over to an independent body, but retained most of the authority within the legislature. So it would have used an independent body kind of as a reference point, as a co-worker in the process, but it would have left the legislature with a lot of that power. That passed the legislature, but Governor Ricketts vetoed it, and then the legislature did not come back and vote for an override at all. They didn't even bring it back up. So that's as close as we've gotten to changing the process in a big way within the legislature. But when it comes to a truly independent body, those bills have been introduced, they've been debated, they have their hearings, and that's about the last you hear of them. If I'm honest, I think the only way that Nebraskans could change that process would be to take it to the ballot, to gather the signatures and to take it to voters. I think legislators have too much to gain. They have too much at stake in the redistricting process to ever give up the power they have.
Jamie asks, would Common Cause introduce an initiative to require a citizens commission for the next redistricting?
Would we ever? Absolutely. The idea of reforming the redistricting process is something that we have discussed and worked on, like I've said, for over a decade, if not two. So yes, we would absolutely look at that as an opportunity and an option, but nothing yet. No opportunities yet. But stay tuned. I'm hopeful that there are opportunities in the future to make big changes, and so yes, I'll just say yes, we would.
Al wanted to mention to everybody that there is actually an initiative out there to try to make our citizens' initiatives less overturnable by the legislature. Require a 4/5 vote to change or overturn something that the citizens had voted in. That is good news. So if you see somebody out there with that initiative, get your signature on it. Protect our ability to keep these state senators in check. Of the legislative bills that we listed as carried over, which have been voted out of committee, which are waiting for committee action, and which might not have had a committee hearing yet?
So they have all had committee hearings. They've all been through that process. That the resolution for winner take all was voted out of committee. I think that one is the only among them that has made it out of committee at this point. No, also the Commission on Legislative Pay has also made it out of committee, but got stuck in some interesting floor debate last year with senators debating the merits of giving themselves a raise when the budget was in such a tight spot. So both of those have made it out. None of the Constitutional Convention bills, those have all been stuck in committee. Automatic voter registration is still in committee. All mail elections is in committee. Election restrictions is all the rest of these are still sitting in committee. No vote recorded for any of them.
If you are looking to get more involved and get more involved in these like in-person, face-to-face volunteer activities, I'm asking you to join one of our action teams. What we're going to be doing with these action teams is mobilizing United activists in communities across the state. Sometimes that might be by legislative district. Sometimes it might be by region. We've got folks in 73 of the 93 counties in Nebraska that are Common Cause supporters. And so we can really make a difference across the state in just about every legislative district too. I encourage you to take some time, either grab that with your phone and fill out that form. It's really important that you share your complete info so that we can make sure when we're calling people to take action, we can make sure that we've got it very focused on where you are, which state legislator or state official you need to be speaking with, because you're in their space and you're one of their constituents. So we really appreciate your time tonight, and we look forward to working together as we try to make sure that we continue to have a robust democracy in Nebraska that works for all Nebraskans.
Thank you. Thank you all from me as well. I appreciate you all joining us here. This was great.